would be great. All right, we're now recording. Thank you very much. Again, welcome to session 2 of Facilitative Leadership and Online Prevention Programs. This is number 2 of our 2-part series that we kicked off on Friday, December 4th. Thanks so much for joining us today. Quick note on how to use Zoom. I know that we always do this. Just like usual, we'll be using the text chat to ask and answer questions. If you're having internet connectivity issues, please feel free to call in on the phone. You should have information for that. Closed captioning is provided today for us by our friends over at Aberdeen Captioning. If you would like to use the closed captioning feature, please select the CC, the closed caption button right there on your information bar. And a quick note on that is that we will be using breakout rooms today. And so normally our captioner does not go into breakout rooms. However, if you would like the captioner to go to a breakout room that you'll be in, please send Jesse or I a private message so that we know that. And we can go ahead and arrange that and make sure that that happens. So just FYI there. And then really all we have for you for our web conference guidelines, we want y'all to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, be on screen, be off screen, eat or drink or do whatever it is that you need to do to feel comfortable and cared for during this web conference. We're in for a 2-hour webinar this morning, which is a long time, but actually I felt like the 2-hour session that we did on Friday just kind of flew by. It's pretty interactive content, but again, still please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. CalCASA is on social media. Please give us a follow and check out our content on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can also always request training and technical assistance by emailing info@calcasa.org. I should have introduced myself before, I suppose, but here we are. My name is Sarah Orton. I use she, her pronouns. I am project coordinator at the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I work primarily on our rape prevention and education project. And I will hand it over to my colleague, Jessie.
Hi, everyone. Jessie, Town Cardenas. I'm a consultant with CalCASA, working with Sarah primarily on rape prevention education program and also working with some organizations who are responding to prevention needs adapted to COVID restrictions. So that's great. And I use she, her pronouns, and I am going to pass it over to Kiara and Yasmin to introduce themselves and get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessie and Sarah. Thank you everyone for coming and for offering your time today to learning together in community. My name is Yasmin Yonis. My colleague here will introduce herself in a second. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling you from Arlington, Virginia, where we're confused a little bit if it's fall or winter. And so just dealing with that each day. Before we start off about what we did last time, for those who were here, and if you weren't, you'll get a little summary from Kiara. I really want us to situate the work we're doing today in the larger picture, right? Really thinking about if we're trying to create a world in which domination doesn't exist, in which sexual and physical violence doesn't exist, or at least it's mitigated, right? And we know how to address harm, in which our children are safe, in which our communities are nourished. We really have to think about how do we embody those liberatory values in the world that we're trying to create in the work that we do. And so we often don't think about meetings as a place for us to be doing that, but truly the world we want to create starts in the little places, in the ways we treat our children, in the ways that we are in community with our neighbors, and also in the ways that we hold space as we're trying to reimagine, collaborate, and work toward this world that we all desperately need. And so really thinking about how do we set up meetings? How do we work with others? How do we offer and invite people to a vision of that world, right? And it really looks like some logistical things that we'll be talking about today. So just want to root us in that, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kiera to, we'll be doing a little bit of that visioning, thinking about how to talk about stakeholders and how to negotiate with and invite with the folks that we're working with today. But I'll hand it over to Kiera to talk about what did we cover on Friday and to move us along. Kiera?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Happy to see some faces that I recognize from last Friday, and I think also some new faces too, so that's wonderful. Yeah, so we started a conversation. Yasmin and I are consultants and colleagues who work a lot in facilitation and a lot of virtual facilitation. We've been working together for years now, and I think we've only been in person together several times. So just a testament to how much relationship building and how much is possible virtually and when we work together. So we try to make all of our interactions behind the scenes and in front of the scenes as playful and joyous and fun as possible. And, you know, we have a lot of serious work. We work on a lot of issues that are as serious as the work that you all do in the world. And yet we want every interaction to be life-giving that we have with each other and with other folks. So I'm loving all the intros coming in on the chat. I'm sitting here with my coffee and feeling a little bit jealous of all your breakfast burritos and good things that you all are holding. I think we can, so I'm wondering for those that were here, if there's anything that sticks out that you remember from Friday to throw it in the chat. And if you weren't here Friday, do not worry at all. I'm wondering if we could just go to slide 40 for a second. We might go a little forward and a little back. Icebreakers, yes, Devon. Nice. Slide 40, yeah, a couple more. 2 more. Boom. Okay, nice. So I'm hoping that Sarah and Jesse might have shared a link to the article that I wrote and Yasmin edited and we actually collaborated on together and did some sessions on. But we were just kind of grounding in what does it take to facilitate with care? And so we had shared some of our tips and values that we work from, this idea of that you don't have to do it all by yourself, that you can assign different roles or invite people to play different roles formally and informally. We talked a lot about how to prioritize people and relationships, that folks are just going through so much with the uprisings around racial justice these days. Like there's so much with the elections, we're really hitting folks. And of course, the ongoing pandemic that has us home with all of our children and pets and families. And so just allowing a little room, and so many of these values that we're bringing in, so many of you are bringing to your work, should have been there all along, but it took this like compounding crises to actually have a center care in our work. And so we did some thinking about our whole bodies because we're so Zoom fatigued. So many folks talked about just being exhausted. And so ways that you can move, that you can stand up, that you can turn off the camera sometimes and be intentional about when you want to look at people and really see and not always just default to that, because people do get very exhausted just all day looking at our own face, which is what many of us do on Zoom. And we just really want to celebrate what works. If you come together and have a small meeting, a short meeting, and it's successful and folks want to come back and folks just have a touch point of, hey, that was a good conversation, or I really liked connecting with those folks, that's going to give you so much more bandwidth to keep on collaborating and keep on working. And I think it's not on this list, but someone said fun, and I just wanted to actually bring that back in. One of you brought it up, but when appropriate, when possible, completely optional, make it fun. You know, we can get so much hard work done if it's actually fun and delightful. So whatever that means and whatever is appropriate in your context, to have a little fun and connect with folks. Go next slide. We talked a little bit about just what is facilitation. Yeah, nice. You can keep clicking through. I think there's a little animation. So just this idea of making it easier for other folks to whatever, take action, collaborate, hear each other, that really at its core, facilitation is in service to others. So how do I create the conditions to make it easier for folks to do work together? And we talked about really it's same conversation, same time. The simplest concept. How do we help people have the same conversation at the same time? Sounds simple, not so simple. We talked about content versus process, and you can go through to the next slide. And we spent some time on this idea of open, narrow, and close. If you weren't there, don't worry, you can jump right in and continue with us. But if you were, this is just a little refresher that helping folks understand which conversation we're in at which time. So are we in a generative conversation? Are we making a decision today? And we're going to spend some time on decision making this morning. And so that folks are really clear, you can clear up a huge percentage of conflict that arises, of folks feeling marginalized, of folks being pushed out of work and collaboration by clarifying the process. Not all of it, I said, but a lot of it, most of it comes from bad process. And the way that bad process shows up is often as interpersonal conflict or as folks feeling not a part of something. And so anything that we can do to help clarify which part of the conversation are we in? What are we talking about right now? What is this meeting about? And so we spend some time in open, narrow, close, and we spend some time building desired outcomes. So we're really clear what we walk away with. And we spend some time building some agendas. And so I hope some of you that were there got a little bit of work done on a meeting you have coming up. Anything else that you remember, feel free to throw in the chat. But that's some of what we covered. And then today we're really going to dig into decision making in a deep way to help clarify some pieces, and then end with a piece around inspiring vision. It's so important how you as a leader and as a facilitator can lead with inspiration and leave room for folks to find themselves in that vision, and folks to also be inspired and create a vision of where we're going. So that's some of what we're up to together. And Yasmin, I wonder if I should pass it back to you for a little bit more connection building before we do the first big content piece of the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kiera. We had a lot of fun on Friday. I felt like we had a lot of fun, and I enjoyed going into the breakout rooms with folks. That's always my favorite. So that's what actually we'll be doing a couple times today. We're going to be going into pairs. So you'll have a one-on-one time to get to maybe meet someone new or reconnect with someone on this call. I understand that not everyone is able to go to a breakout room. So if that happens, actually, Jesse, we could put folks in threes just in case somebody can't go into a breakout room. They still have partners. But relationship building is so important. You all are not only learning today from us and with each other, but you're also learning from each other, right? And your resources is really your community, the folks who really know what it's like to go into those rooms or to hold those sessions for young folks or to be doing the work that you're doing every day, day in and day out, especially in a pandemic that has moved so much of our work virtually or has heightened so much of the crisis or work that we're doing. So next, if you could go to the intro slide on 38. Awesome, thank you. So you're going to be going as Jesse's handling the logistics to put us in the pair. Now, if you could go to the intro slide, Jesse, slide 38. Yep, thank you. So when you are put it into a breakout room, go ahead and accept. This Harry Potter magic, and you'll share your name and pronoun, introduce yourself, and just talk about what is one thing you've been experimenting with in your meetings or sessions. And when I use the word experiment, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to even really be that intentional, but how have you been shifting? What have you been trying out and seeing how it's working for your events, for your meetings, advocacy work, for even your team meetings? So that's really how is that work coming up, and what is working and what isn't. So you'll be able to share that and learn what's happening for each other in that. So we'll just take a moment and wait for Jessie to do her magic. Thank you, Jessie. In a moment, you should see a box pop up, and go ahead and accept when that does. And we'll be in the sessions
If you're in the main room with us and you didn't mean to be, please let me know so that I can shift you around.
Hi, this is Elsa. I was sent to a room, but nobody was there. And it didn't go to a room. It just stayed at the, I don't know, the interface.
Okay, let me see if I can move you
Thank you.
again. Thanks, Elsa. Uh-oh, Elsa, you're back.
I never went. It didn't go.
So strange. It shows that you're in breakout 1, but that you didn't join.
It didn't show me a screen to join.
Okay.
Will you send me again?
Yeah, I just sent another one. Do you see
Okay.
it?
No.
Usually it just pops right up on the screen.
Right, it does. Let me see. Hold on.
I feel like, did we have
It's-
trouble with this last time?
Yeah. It's sending me to breakout room 2 now.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Welcome back. We'll get everybody back in the main room, and then Yasmin will get started again.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed being able to be in the breakout room. We were having a really great discussion about what's been working, what people are experimenting with. And so let's just share back. Kiera, do you wanna talk a little bit about, actually, I think Kiera, I'm gonna give it back to you.
Yes, I had a fabulous conversation too. I'm glad I got to be in the breakout rooms, and I'm just so struck with how much you all are experimenting with and how creative you're already being. So I feel like we're already colleagues in this larger project of, you know, how to have really excellent meetings. So yeah, just keep clicking forward. Let's get started with a few pieces. No worries, Jesse. I think we're 2 slides up. We're keeping Jessie on her toes by making her go all over the place for our slides. Sorry. Keep going. Couple more. Yeah, keep going. Didn't move. And one more. Here we go. Okay. So one of the pieces we wanted to bring to you today is about decision making. So much conflict happens, again, because folks are not clear about how a decision is being made. And so that's where a lot of different problems can come up. Well, we thought we were all talking about this, and then something else happened. And so part of what's helpful is to know what's happening in a given situation. And this is part of the same conversation, same time. Oh, we're all talking about ideas. Are we all deciding together, or is someone else making this decision? And so when we think about engaging more people in our work, I know a lot of you are doing community engagement, volunteer engagement, and sometimes there's a hesitancy as leaders to engage more folks. There's a fear sometimes about opening something up. What are some of the risks of engaging more people in the work that you do? You can throw it in the chat. What are some of the problems? What could be a risk of engaging more people in the conversations, the work, and the decisions that you have to make? Is there any reason not to include more people? Yeah, Anna's saying more cooks in the kitchen, priorities can get lost, there's different folks in the room. Yes, thanks for those who are throwing some ideas in the chat. Time is something people bring up a lot. Elsa, can take more time and talk to all these people. I just got to get my work done. The conversation could go any which way. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's certainly a possibility of risks to engaging more folks in your work. What are some of the benefits? What could be a good reason to do it? Why would you want to talk to more people? Throw in the chat. More ideas? Yeah, you get some more ideas. Different ideas? Yeah, people think differently than you. That can be helpful. You can reach more folks. Yeah, empowering people can, the decisions that affect them the most, and folks being able to make those decisions is absolutely a core value of my work, actually. Like, how do those most affected or most impacted be part of the decision making? Yeah, brainstorming can be more rich. You can more diverse perspectives, educating each other. Absolutely. So there's benefits and there's risks. what we talk about is wanting to reach maximum appropriate. It's not always more. It's what's appropriate for what we're talking about. And we want to reach maximum appropriate. So given what we're talking about and how this impacts folks, what's the right level of engagement? And trying to figure that out. It's possible that you can over engage folks. I'm on one listserv that's inviting me to a lot of things that are not quite of interest. And I'm figuring like, how do I change my settings to get off of this listserv? They're just over engaging. It's not a bad thing, but I'm like, this is too much. This is too much. How do I get out of here? But what is much more common is minimum necessary, you know, and probably many of you have experienced that. Minimum necessary is like, we checked the box, we did community engagement. You know, I come from also a background in city planning where it's a lot of meetings of like, do you want this or do you want that? Okay, great, we did community engagement. And that's not really authentically having folks shape the city that they want to live in. It's picking A or B is, you know, what I would call minimum necessary, because in that case, it's law that there's a public meeting. So folks have a public meeting at a time that no one can come and don't announce it and give people a choice of A or B. And it's like, boom, we did our community engagement, right? So this is like what we're very familiar with and most folks have been familiar with. So we want to avoid minimum necessary, but we want to actually find that sweet spot of maximum appropriate involvement. Make sense? Y'all with me? I see a little nodding. Okay, go next slide. So we talk about stakeholders, and some of you brought it up already in the chat, like the idea that those most impacted, I think Elsa was saying, like, how do those most impacted make decisions? And so click again. I think there might be a couple secret animation there. Oh, no, go back. Sorry. But some of them, I think it's just a spacing thing. Okay, so what is a stakeholder? This is a long list of folks. It may be even longer than what you're thinking of. Absolutely, a stakeholder is those who are most impacted by the decision. And so we want to actually think about how they can shape the decisions that are made. Decisions are more rich and thoughtful when folks that actually are closer to the work are giving input into that, or even in the decision-making seat sometimes. Any folks that are marginalized or typically unheard are stakeholders. And we want to think about, how do we get some of those voices in? How do we build enough relationships so they can actually be part of shaping what this looks like, especially when we're rolling out something for them and for their community, or we're asking questions like, why don't those folks ever come to our meeting? You know, and then we start to characterize and pathologize people. Oh, they don't like to come to our meetings. Like they're not in the, when actually what has happened is we haven't had either an elegant invitation, we're not in enough relationship, or we haven't engaged at a high enough level that folks are showing up. So if people are not coming to your meeting, I'm always asking, like, what's wrong with my meeting? Because my work is not about what's wrong with those people. It's about what's wrong with my meeting that can make it more possible for these folks to be here. People that function as a connector in and across sectors or fields are important stakeholders. I don't know if you can think of examples of what that looks like in your field, but there are a lot of folks who go across coalitions or across organizations that can be very powerful in engaging them, because they see patterns across and they know they got their hands in a bunch of different kind of pots of community work, and so they can actually bring a lot to it. Anyone who's in a position to implement the decision is an important stakeholder. Sometimes we do all the work and then we hand it over to, for example, frontline staff to implement. What are the odds that they're going to implement exactly what actually was developed in this decision if they're not part of the conversation and part of shaping it? And even more damaging, we might have missed an important consideration of what it's going to take to implement this if we didn't talk to them about how to do it, right? This one's some of my favorite, is someone who's in a position to prevent it from being implemented or block. Like anyone who might block, what we tend to do is avoid. Like, I know they're not going to like this idea, and I know they're probably not going to be on board, so I'm just going to not talk to them and avoid them until the very last minute. And then guess what? Chances are they probably are going to block it and prevent it from happening. So it takes a lot of courage, but the rule is to engage early and often, and it makes it more possible that they won't block and that they'll actually move it. Sometimes folks who prevent something are holding a different set of considerations. And so finding out what is it for you, or what would it take for this to move forward? What are you thinking about? What are you protecting sometimes, functionally or dysfunctionally, right? what would it take? So when you engage and you understand their perspective, there might be some things you can do that make it more possible that they'll be on board, or that at least they won't prevent it. Maybe they're not ever going to be on board with what you're doing, but they'll stand out of the way. They'll see a bigger picture. So when you have the courage to engage early enough, and it's more likely something will move forward. Has relevant expertise or information or expertise. So this is all everything from the way we traditionally think of like research and data, like that kind of expertise, but also grassroots expertise, community expertise. Young people have a whole kind of expertise, that understanding what is the young person's economy and what makes it exciting to participate. And it's not all the same things that it was 5 years ago. Like there's new stuff, TikTok and other stuff, right? And so like, what is the expertise that you need to inform this decision? It might not only be, research and PhD kind of expertise there, because there's lots of kind of expertise that you might need for your decisions. And a couple others that I think are not showing up. Anyone who's responsible for the final decision, I think you want to make sure that things don't get along too far without them. And the other piece I wanted to bring up was about informal authority. So there's not only positional power of like, yeah, we're actually in charge of this decision, or we're actually in charge of implementing it, but there's a kind of informal authority that moves through communities that's really valuable to recognize. I wonder what might be examples of that in your setting. If you think of anything, throw it in the chat. But sometimes I think of community elders who don't have any positional power in an organization or even in a city, but have so much informal authority. And if you want something to move in that community or that population, that these are the elders who you talk to, or sometimes they're community leaders. So without any formal authority, it can be really important for them to bless what you're doing, but also to understand their expertise, which can be really deep, that they have a lot of expertise from that. So recognizing that expertise and asking for it to inform what you're doing. So I love to look for informal authority as well as formal authority. So that's a pretty long list of stakeholders. I'm wondering if just any thoughts or anything coming to mind. Is there any folks any one of these that you hadn't thought of before that you're now thinking about a little bit? Throw it in the chat, or if anyone wants to speak out loud, you're welcome. We're not that big a group, just 60 or so chickens in here, right?
My name is Alex. I am a program coordinator at Girls Inc. of Alameda County. And something that stood out for me is, or something that I never thought of, is someone who is in a position to prevent something from being implemented that's kind of left out of the conversation a lot of times. So yeah, that's important for you to think about. Like, how can you navigate around that? So
nice.
That was interesting.
Thanks for that, Alex. Thanks for speaking up, jumping in. Love Girls Inc. Anyone else? We have time for maybe one more comment if there is one. Anything thinking about stakeholders?
I think it's, sorry, this is Kevin from Sierra Community House. I really like this idea of shifting of that importance and like that title that we often have with people. If you want to go to the director to get information, we never really think about going to the people underneath that can give us even more information. And so, I mean, I work with a lot of youth, and this idea that I'll go to the students before I go to the teacher, because the students can give me more in-depth information than the teacher really can. And sometimes the people up top spread themselves too thin, and there's nothing wrong with going, below them to get more information, more in-depth answers to questions.
Yes, I love this. Thank you, Kevin, for speaking up and for sharing that example. I think there's a lot there that segues nicely into the next slide that I want to bring to you. So let's keep moving. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so just as Kevin was starting to mention, this is a little framework. The axes, just to orient you, level of ownership on the left is how important is this decision to these stakeholders? That's what level of ownership means. Level of involvement is how deep are we involving them? And so those are the two axes. What you'll see is these are all good ways to make decisions. There's no bad ways on this diagram. What we're trying to decide is what is the maximum appropriate level of involvement for the stakeholders given this decision that we have to make. And so in a moment, I'm going to ask you to actually think of a real decision, and we'll have some breakout time to work through that with a partner, with some other folks to coach you to try to figure this out. But let me go over the different circles so they make sense. The first circle is called decide and announce. So if I'm a leader and I have a decision to make, I might decide and announce. Sometimes I think about, if you all were my board of directors and this is our organization, it's a really big board, and I'm the executive director, and I say to you all, so happy to see everyone here. I want you to save a week in February because we're all going to go on retreat. And we're going to meet up in Las Vegas. So save a week in February. I'll see you there. Everybody's like, what? I decided and I announced, and there may be some problems with that. One, there's a travel ban. Most of us are on lockdown wherever we are. We can't travel. We've also got kids home from school. We've got all kinds of things. So you might be thinking, I'd like a little more. So if you're feeling some type of way, that's usually a signal that it's under involvement. Oftentimes we feel like, excuse me? Because I didn't ask you, I didn't take any considerations of what it might mean for you to travel, or what you might, all of that. So decide and announce is a low level of ownership and involvement, but it is sometimes appropriate. It is sometimes a good leadership stance to decide and announce. Examples of that could be in an emergency. We're all in a room together that's on fire, and I say, what does everyone think is the best way to leave this room and get outside safely? Gabby, Bianca, Holly, what are your ideas for how to get out of this room? No, I'm going to say, everyone stand up and go out the door to the left. And that is both literal and a metaphor, that there is sometimes urgency, that it's appropriate as a leader to step up and make a decision, and importantly, announce. There's a level that's lower that is not on this diagram because it's not a good idea, and it's called decide and don't announce. And that's never appropriate, but most of us have witnessed it or been part of it. You know darn well that a decision has been made. Nobody said anything, nobody told anyone anything, but that is moving through the whole system and through the organization, and we know. So that's never good. But as a leader, to decide and announce could be urgency. I want to caution a little bit, because one of the ways that white supremacy plays out is a kind of false urgency, that everything must happen, and it brings everybody into a frenzy and doesn't allow time for engagement. And it's not always true. So I want to always investigate the urgency. Is it truly urgent, or is it a false kind of urgency that we could actually create some more spaciousness and some more room to engage? But sometimes there's hard decisions, budget cuts, there's hard decisions that you have to make as a leader. And what is appropriate is to stand in that decision and announce and share with folks, here's the information. We know that some folks are going to lose their jobs. Here's where the budget's at now. Here's how we're going to make the decision. Here's when we're going to communicate with you. This is hard, but that is good leadership in that time. So some examples of when decide and announce can actually be appropriate and really, really positive. Also, when there's low levels of ownership. Like, I'm planning a party, and I want everyone to give me input on the color scheme, because we're gonna hang some signs behind our Zoom, and I just don't know, like, we don't have colors for the organization. Should we, like, does anyone not like pink here? That kind of thing. You're like, I don't care, just put the thing up, like, just decorate, it's fine. Someone might be into it, but it's like, it doesn't matter to you that much. It doesn't affect you that much. So just let me know what's going on with that, right? The next two bubbles, you'll see gather input from individuals and decide, and gather input from a group and decide. These look very similar. Kevin's example of, like, maybe I go to some young people and I get some input from them, and then I decide, or I bring a proposal to the senior leader or the teacher. The difference between gather input from individuals and gather input from a group is about their experience. Sometimes you want to maintain confidentiality, or it's super high stakes and it's difficult for people to share what they think. And so in that way, you might just want to gather input from individuals and decide. So you protect the individual so they don't see what each other is saying. You could do that in person. You could do that through a survey tool, or you could gather input through, emails or coffee dates or any kind of tool. There's lots of ways to gather input from folks. Gather input from a group is that you have those folks together and they hear each other's responses, which may be similar or may be very different. And sometimes it feels higher risk because you're holding a conversation that is not yet in agreement. and there might be high stakes. The stakeholders might be super impacted by that. They might feel really strongly. There might be disagreement. So that can feel intimidating to hold. One of the benefits of holding that space is that they see the dilemma that you're holding. By sharing transparently, oh, wow, we all have different ideas about this. And this is kind of a tough decision to make because some folks are gonna not be supported in this decision, right? And so they see the dilemma that you hold, and it makes it easier when you do decide that they say, oh, okay, it wasn't really what I wanted, but I saw how many people were excited about that. Let's keep it moving, right? So it can be valuable. And also just that people influence each other, and that can be a positive way that you come together to the decision that the group is sharing ideas. It might shift and change people's opinions. So gather input is really clear. The caution that I want to make, because I work with a lot of organizations who say, we talk about things all together here and decide things. And I say, oh my goodness, this is a fully consensus-based organization. That's incredible. I've very rarely seen that. Most of the time, what's going on in there is you have a really collaborative leader who's gathering input all the time. But where the confusion comes is, folks, if you're offering input and you think that you're making that decision, this is where problems happen. And this is where it's the leader's responsibility to say, no, actually, I'm deciding this. And sometimes as leaders, we shy away from that responsibility because we want to work with people. We want to be collaborative and open. But by not standing in the fact that it's your decision to make and what you're doing is actually gathering input, it creates confusion and it actually creates conflict and can marginalize folks. I thought we talked about this. But if you tell me from the beginning, I want your best thinking and your best ideas because I'm trying to make this tough decision. Then if it's transparent up front, I'm like, okay, I'm sharing my ideas. It might not go my way. I know that you're holding that decision. It's much easier to move forward. So the whole thing is really about being clear. How are you making this decision? How are you making this decision? And as leaders, you can ask in any conversation you're at, are we making a decision today? And if so, how are we making this decision and who's making this decision? And if they say, oh, we're going to talk all together about it, then say, oh, wow, we're making this by consensus. Exciting, right? And then to push a little. But the consensus bubble is very exciting. And I think folks shy away from consensus for many of the reasons you all outlined. I'm afraid of time. I'm afraid of opening it up that much. Yeah, thanks, Yasmin. Notice the little fallback arrows in the diagram. So when you're working with consensus, you have a fallback before you start. The worst thing you can do is get halfway into consensus building and then it's like, oh, we're in really different places. This is hard. Now I'm just going to decide to announce, because folks then are invested. But if up front you say, we're going to spend 15 minutes, we're going to spend 2 hours, we're going to spend 3 months, whatever, it's scalable. And if we cannot reach this by consensus by that time, then we will fall back. And that can motivate folks because I actually want to make this decision. I want to be part of this consensus. So I'm going to do everything I can to get there in the time. Or I know it's going to fall back to this committee. So I'm okay with that. We did our best. We gave our input. And the fallback can actually go to any circle. To Kevin's point, not to always fall back to the leader, like the positional power executive leader, but to fall back, like, let's let the students decide. If we can't get there all together, let's give it over and give clear constraints. So the last level, the highest level of ownership and involvement is actually delegate with constraints. And this is because as a leader who is responsible for this decision, I'm actually handing it over. And it could be anyone. It could be a committee. It could be an individual. It could be the students. It could be your volunteers. The important piece there is constraints. So if you ask folks to plan a party for you and you don't tell them it's for 3-year-olds, you're going to get the wrong party and that's going to be your fault, right? So it's really important to set them up for success in the decision of like, this party has to be for 3-year-olds and it has to cost less than $20. Go team, go. Then they can come back with the decision. If what they're coming back with is a proposal, it's actually gather input and decide. If what they're coming back with is a decision, it's you fully delegated that decision. So that's a little distinction there. It's a fabulous thing to do as leaders, and you don't have to give the whole thing. Maybe you just say, what kind of music should we play at the party? Maybe you don't give out the whole party, but just pieces of it. How are we going to handle the invite list? Something. So know that you can peel off pieces, and most most decisions that I encounter are multiple decisions nestled in other decisions. So if you're having trouble figuring this out, it's probably because you have multiple decisions nestled together. And if you start to pull them off, it becomes much, much easier. How are we going to decide who plans the party? Oh, well, that I'm going to decide and announce. But who comes to the party, that's going to be a consensus-based decision, the invite link. And we're going to gather some input on like food vendors, because some people in our community have tons of experience with that, you know? So you can take different pieces of it in different ways. Does it make sense generally? Yeah. So I want you to practice. Go one more slide. I want you to identify a real decision that you have to make coming up. It could be you or someone else. And think through a little bit, who are the stakeholders? Take some time. Go one more slide. Take some time to brainstorm stakeholders and think about what is the appropriate level of involvement. What's the appropriate level of involvement? And see which circle you land in and why. And we're going to send you to breakout rooms so you can actually help each other, help coach each other, talk it through. Someone that doesn't know everything about your work and your decision can actually be really helpful, asking questions. And to list out a few of the stakeholders. And when you think about stakeholders, think about what's important to them. And if you don't know, then that's a research question for you to explore, which means talk to them or find out or have some focus groups or talk to people. So getting to know your stakeholders and what's important is part of community organizing. Yeah, Gina, we'll put it on the back slide. Let's get into some breakout rooms. I think we have about 15 minutes. Is that right, Yasmin? I know I took a little extra.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do 15 minutes. And if you're not in a breakout group for whatever reason you can't, you can do this as a solo reflection. It's just nice to have some people help you.
Yeah, and the slides are in the chat for those of you who asked last time to be able to go into the breakout rooms and be able to review the slides that Kiera was just talking about, and you'll have the prompt questions. So just check out the chat for the link for that.
All right, let's do it. Hi, Jesse.
Hey.
My Zoom crashed, so I didn't know if it was just me.
Oh, okay.
I think it might have just been me.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think you could give them a little more time, like at least until the top of the hour or a couple minutes after.
See, it's weird. I was private messaging you, but it said that you weren't in the meeting anymore, which is strange because you clearly are in the meeting. But I'm going to jump, and I was trying to private message you. Adriana on the call was kicked out of her breakout room, so maybe we could send her to another one. I do not have the powers.
I moved a couple of people because it looked like they were in there with people who didn't join.
Yeah.
So it looked like they were alone in there. And I tried to go to one, like.
You could send Adriana to where I just was having a nice conversation with Gina and then crashed out. So that might be
Do you
nice.
know which number you were in?
I don't remember. It just had Gina and Colleen, but Colleen is not actually able to do it.
It's okay. It's not that big of a deal.
Well, I feel bad for Gina too, because I just fell out of that room. So
I show that Adriana is in a room, but not joined. And also I see like Carla is in here, so she didn't join the room. So I'll move you.
all good.
9. I'm gonna move you to breakout room 9, Adriana.
Okay.
See it? Did you get the invite to join? Okay. Kiera, you wanted them to have about 15 minutes in here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, so they have about 8 more minutes.
Yeah, I think that's
Good?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. Great. You don't see the PowerPoint anymore, do you?
No, that's fine though.
It's okay for now? Okay. Hi, Gabby. Do you have an invite for a breakout room, or did you end up back here from a breakout room?
I did. The time was just up, so I left the room to go back. Or
Oh,
room was empty.
we extended it.
Oh,
What?
okay.
That's okay.
Gabby, I'm sorry. I fell out, like my Zoom crashed.
That's okay.
Oh.
It's okay.
Well, look, you can continue right here.
It was so abrupt in the middle of your story. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I still just kept talking, so I just talked through it.
I was coached by a ghost.
I'm good at talking to myself, honestly, so.
Where did you end up landing? Which circle?
I was saying I'm on the consensus circle right now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so knowing that we just now have to do the thing. So.
Yeah, nice. I'm always excited when people land in consensus. Maybe I'll say a little bit about it when folks come back. Cool. You can set up that fallback, set up a amount of time, and be clear about that up front. It should go well.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Okay, folks, if you're hanging out here, just wait a second and the rest of the group is coming back. Jesse, just let me know when you think everyone's back.
Okay, I'm going to put for the breakout rooms to close in 1 minute.
Perfect.
All right.
Here they come.
Electronically gathering people up.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Just wait another minute for folks to arrive. Here they come. It's always so fun to see you come back. Okay. Are we back?
We're on the final countdown.
Oh, I see.
So everyone should be back in about 5 seconds.
Nice.
So
I am talking to you.
Here we go. All right. Welcome back. I hope. Here they come. Last few. I hope you had a good conversation. I hope you weren't cut off too abruptly in the middle of a great idea. Sometimes happens with Zoom. Did you make some good progress around the decisions that you're working on? Did you have some good coaches? Excellent. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 people. Does anyone want to share where they landed and why? or anything juicy that came up in your conversation? Any questions about any of the kinds of decision making? Seeing that you have lots of options that are all good options. I wanted to say a little something about consensus. Did any folks land in consensus? Gabby and I got to talk a little bit, and I think Gabby landed there. Did anyone else land in consensus? A couple of people maybe. One of the things I wanted to say about consensus, just to be very clear, to give it a time constraint and give it a fallback before you start is one of the best things you can do to have everyone be clear about that. The other thing is to recognize that a consensus-based decision is not a majority rules. So it doesn't mean that you at some point just default to a vote. And voting is a kind of decision making. It's not on our list, but that doesn't mean it's not an acceptable way to make a decision. Part of the problem with a majority vote is you've got all those folks who didn't vote for who are still around. What is the likelihood that they're gonna pick up this work and move with you and collaborate with you? In the wake of the election, this seems fairly obvious that we have very divided nation state. But the point being that at the end of a consensus decision, everyone agrees to move this forward. It might not have been the thing that they wanted most. They might have had some real concerns and objections, and hopefully you made space in the process to hear some of that. But at the end of the decision, that everyone around the table said, yep, we're going to support this and move it forward. That's what consensus-based decision-making is. And it's different than voting or than a win-lose, or it's different than a compromise. At the end, are we all willing to move it forward? And there's some nice tools like Fist to 5. You can Google, just some ways. We even do it on Zoom. Sometimes we're like, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down and a thumbs in the middle, and we go around and say like, what is it that we need to know for all those thumbs that are to the side? And often it's considerations. Oftentimes disagreement comes, but it's not actually disagreement. It's I'm taking care of some things that you might not know about. So I often ask that question, what is it that you know that might be helpful for the whole group in making this decision? And then folks can say, look, we work with these young people and the real problem is they just can't get here. And it's about transportation. It's not about food or whatever. So making space and time for folks to contribute and see that whole picture so that we can arrive together. At this point, do we all agree to move this forward? Yes. So it's a strong decision in that everyone's going to support and move this forward. Just a little bit getting us beyond winning and losing and binary thinking. Great. Any last questions or reflections on this? Is this useful? Is this something you think you can bring to other folks? It should be. I hope that you can explain it to others, or even, bring this diagram and point to circles and talk with your teams. And even just in spaces to feel like you can ask a question. Are we making a decision today? If so, how? And then folks say, oh no, we're not making a decision. Those other people over there make the decision. We're giving input. It's going to help everyone in the room get really clear and work better together. It's a little decision-making tool. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to pass to Yasmin. I don't know if we need a little energizer or something, but I'll leave it up to you.
Did you want to do a share back?
Yes, absolutely. If there's any folks that want to share something or lift something up from their group, we are most welcome.
Maybe we can ask folks to put it in the chat if you're interested in sharing what is something that you talked about in your group. Sure. Take a moment. And this is really helpful for everyone else too. You get to learn from each other what is happening in all your work. So what's your offering to each other? And go ahead and just hit enter. No offerings? I think there's some offerings. How about we do this? You can take the time. We also need to go on break and have a stretch break. Kiara, we're still doing a stretch break, correct? So for
Sure.
about 5 minutes. So maybe folks, if you could take that time also to think about what do you want to offer in the chat. But we can put up the slide, Jesse, for the stretch break and maybe some music if it's possible. It's really important to remember you have a body to take care of yourself. If you need to go to the bathroom, also do that or grab something to eat. And we'll be back in 5 minutes. And feel free also to stretch. I'm going to do some stretches too. Thank you, everyone. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Jesse, for the music. I like it. I like it. Folks are talking. Just give folks a moment to come back to their couch or desk, to the computer. I hope you were able to. I got a banana and some tea. I hope I skipped breakfast today, and I feel the difference. So I hope you got what you needed to be nourished. Awesome. If we can go to the next slide. Oh, maybe one more slide. I'll probably get you to come back to that, Jesse. Awesome. So I see some offerings in the chat, and so before we move into the next session, I really wanted to highlight what some of the things are people offering. Elizabeth talking about the use of surveys to find out what teens want and need to learn more about in terms of teen dating and sexual assault. So really engaging them as stakeholders, them knowing what they need and collaborating. Sam is talking about the frustration that comes up when there's a lack of transparency, right, about what decisions are being made and who's making it. And that's really talking about transparency and also power. And we know that transparency is a liberatory work value. When we're talking about dominant work culture, white supremacist work culture, and there's some links that we'll share in the email after. A lack of transparency is it's very much indicative of that culture. And so when we shift to transparency and making it clear where power lies, that's really a shift in embodying our values. So thank you for that. And Alex talks about the challenge of setting standards for youth right now and holding them accountable and what those standards should be, knowing we're in a pandemic. And Alex, my offering to you is that we really can't hold people accountable, right? But people can be accountable when we create a culture and a space for them to stand and stand in account. But I also think about, what does it look like to engage those youth right now, and what is really necessary? What are some things that they can set up, right, in a collaborative fashion of what happens when certain things are not fulfilled or certain things are done or not done? What does it look like to co-create that with young people? So it's not punitive or consequences, but really also about giving support as needed. So these are really great. Thank you so much. For those of you who offered and for being in the small groups. So we're going to talk about next is, what are the components of an inspiring vision, right? But before we do that, we have a little exercise we're going to do together. It only works if everyone does it. And so I really hope that you can go ahead and hit the chat button in the bottom center and open up your chat if you're not already in it. And really think about, what is the world that you are trying to create? And I mean the world in the biggest sense. So you let go of all the folks who are talking about being pragmatic, being realistic, it's not possible, it's too much. If anything is possible, right? If like right now you can make it happen, right? And everything will shift toward that. What is the world that you want to exist, that you need to exist, that your young people need to exist, your community, your family, your elders, the folks who are most vulnerable? What is the world that you want if you were able to just wake up and existed? What does that look like, right? So for me, it's like, what if everyone's needs are fulfilled and everyone has housing and food, right? What if everyone is safe to go outside, right? And everyone has clean air? What if there was no wars, right? What if we didn't actually have to work 40, 60, 70 hours to keep a roof over our head, and we were able to do what we wanted to do, right? And still care for each other? What does it look like to live in a world beyond capitalism? What does it look like to live in a world in which sexual violence doesn't exist, right? So I see folks putting it in the chat already. So what if, finish that sentence, what if we lived in a world in which, what if, let's take a moment to think and reflect about that, to feel it, to see it. What can you imagine? And go ahead and put that in the chat. And when you've gone and done that, go ahead and read what your community, your colleagues are writing. These are awesome. So folks are talking about, what if safety, peaceful, without racism, everyone has their basic needs met? What if violence wasn't an option? What if we had a world that cares about and is engaged with the well-being of all others? A world without human, animal, or environmental exploitation? What if we lived in a world where Indigenous people had their land back? What if happiness was something we felt and not something we had to work toward? What if everyone had people who loved and supported them, and they had access to support they need to reach their full potential? What if trauma didn't exist? What if everyone had housing and healthcare? What if we actually sat down and had a conversation and took out the word but? What if everyone had their basic needs met and were able to live thriving lives? What if billionaires didn't exist? These are awesome. Let's take another moment for those of you who haven't finished. Go ahead and hit enter. Yeah, Gina, what if we could all listen deeply? What if love is nurtured and fear is squashed? What if we lived in a world where people value their community instead of just their own individual interests? What if we lived in a world where we all had the opportunity to take breaks, rest, meet our needs, and not feel guilty? Yeah, the things capitalism does to us, Miriam. What if we lived in a world rooted in simple kindness? Everyone would be safe. All aspects of life would be unselfishly considered. Thank you, everyone. If you're not finished, feel free to go put that in the chat and folks will be able to read it and to be inspired. But really what you're already done here is you already created an inspiring vision of the world that you want to believe in, right? That you already believe in, the world that is possible, right? And we just think about all the things that are happening right now, that in generations past, people were told that it's impossible, that it's not pragmatic. And I'm not throwing being pragmatic out the window completely, but we really need to start with, what is the world that we're trying to create? What do we see? What do we imagine? So components of inspiring vision, a vision is an image of a mission accomplished, right? That we are already where we're trying to get. And it's a future state where you can actually touch and see and smell the things that you're talking about, right? What those successes look like. Children that are safe from sexual or physical violence, that are housed, that our soil is safe, that our air and our ozone layers are protected, right? That we don't have to exploit each other or the earth for the things that we need, right? So what can you imagine? And if you can imagine it, then you can articulate it. And if you can articulate it, then you can start inviting people into that, right? And so if you can go back one slide. I love Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison, I'm pretty sure everyone knows about her, but if you don't, like, she has the ability, she's a wordsmith, she's an artist, right? And she's a storyteller, and we all are storytellers. And so many of our Indigenous cultures really center storytelling as important components of world building. And if we don't know how to, and all children know how to tell stories, right? Often sometimes we're socialized out of it, but we know how to tell stories of worlds that don't exist, the worlds that only we can see, or the world that's happening now. And we're socialized sometimes to start speaking in passive ways. But Toni Morrison said, make up a story for our sake and yours. Forget your name in the street. Tell us what the world has been to you in the dark places and in the light. Don't tell us what to believe, what to fear. Show us belief's white skirt and a stitch that unravels fear's call. Right? And so Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, these are some of my favorite writers who are able to, almost like, they always take my breath away in their ability to craft and to build and to bring you into a world that so many of us think that isn't possible, but we know is possible. And here she talks about a bit about vulnerability and the ability to really put yourself out there. Next slide, 2 slides Yeah. So what does it look like to create? Actually, one more, if you could go back one. So what are the parts of an inspiring vision, right? It conjures image and it unifies. So you did that in the what if exercise that you just did in the chat, right? And so your ability to show children already, or our neighbors and our community members already safe, already nourished, already having their basic needs met and more, right? Being able to have joy and happiness. And when you do that, you conjure up this world in front of people. You use descriptive language. And that, I think about justice work, right, is creative work. It's imagining and believing in a world that some people haven't seen, maybe you have in some sort of parts, but believing in it, right? But then also it's about deep listening and reflecting back. When we talk about who's inspiring, we often in dominant culture very much prioritize and privilege the written word, or the idea of one inspiring hero or person, right? A charismatic, usually male, white figure that's going to save us. But we know that in organizing, in communities, in fighting for justice, and in building this world, that it takes so many of us, right? And that it's not just the speakers. We don't need just speakers. We actually need deep listeners. And all of you in the work that you do, you know how important listening deeply and being able to reflect back, the difference it makes when people feel heard, what Kiera was talking about, that oftentimes that conflict comes up, not because people don't want to work with you, but because they don't feel heard, right? Or there wasn't a space met for their considerations to be put on the table. And so being able to deeply listen to people, to be able to understand what are their concerns, to be able to really think about what are their needs, and to be able to reflect back. I hear you saying, Kiera, what I heard was. Those are really important sentences that we can all practice together, and you'll have an opportunity to do that in the breakout room after this. But we really can invite people in, right? If we don't know each other, and if we don't know what they need and what really is, if they're a great partner or appropriate partner for this world that we're trying to create. And then also third, lifting up agreement, right? I heard you say XYZ, but this is what I'm hearing that we agree upon. And sometimes you're working with people that you don't have a lot to agree upon, or it's very difficult, but you can always find, I say, one little part in which there's an overlap. So I hear that you agree that children should XYZ, right? If you're working with conservative school systems and you're trying to do sexual education, what are the places that you agree upon? What is the future that you want to create for these children? What are the parts of the education or the system that you overlap in? And then this is really important. We often have the habit of moving from of speaking in passive language, and passive language is also part of dominant culture, right? Like, what are you trying to say? It hides who has power, who doesn't. It hides. I like to say that passive language often talks about the oppressed and there's no oppressors, talks about the marginalized without talking about those with power, talks about the poor without talking about the rich. And so really shifting to bold language, bold active language is really important. So thinking and reflecting and being aware when you're speaking, am I using passive language or am I using active language? And it takes a little bit of courage sometimes, and there's some risks, but it's so worth it. And then lastly, connecting vision to strategy, right? How do you do that? How do we get to the place that we're trying to go? So let's look at some examples. Next slide. Maybe somebody wants to get off mute. I feel like I've been talking a lot. I don't know if Gabby, you're the person I'm seeing. I don't want to put you on the spot with if there's anxiety. If there's anybody who wants to unmute and just read this for us.
I can unmute.
You can. And my apologies if I put you too much on the spot. You can
That's
say
okay. That's okay.
only with consent.
I'm sorry.
Only with consent. If you consent to this, then
I consent. It's yeah.
okay.
Don't even sweat. So components of an inspiring vision reflects a high standard of performance. Examples of that are all of our organizing campaigns build power, leadership, and a sense of community. It describes a unique attribute. So examples of that are we are known throughout the sector as the youth program that most consistently prepares young people for leadership roles. It represents future accomplishments. So an example of that could be in 3 years, former program participants will be in the leadership of the program. It conjures up an image or picture. So an example of that would be by the thousands, people crowd our phone and email lines asking for our products and services. It presents a unifying theme. So an example would be we assume effective responsibility for the stewardship of our community open spaces. And it appeals to shared values. So an example of that would be people can count on us to fulfill the promise of quality and integrity.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabby, for doing that. It's always nice to hear somebody else's voice. So here are some other things, right? About like, how do we talk to people? This is an important point I'm making. How do we talk to people that shifts from the usual way, right? I keep thinking about young people, and I know a lot of you work with young people. But what is a way that we can communicate with them that shifts completely away from this idea that we work for you, that we tell you what is best, that you don't really, this idea of even hierarchies, right, tells us that there's some folks that know best, right? And there's some folks who don't know, and then and then you communicate in that way. So what does it mean to shift the power dynamics and to work with and invite people in an inspiring vision, right? In a liberatory way, in a world in which they're seen, in a world in which they're safe, in a world in which they actually want to live in a world that points out the things that are not life nourishing and life generating where we are now, and shifts us toward that, right? I'll just take a moment for us to reflect. Is there any questions about this? Does anyone want to put something in the chat or unmute for a second? What are some difficulties you have when you invite people to a vision? What are some concerns and worries or pushback you get? If you're thinking about unmuting, just go ahead and do it. I invite you to. I promise it'll be okay. We learn a lot when we get to hear each other's voices. Sam, were you gonna say something? You're on mute. Oh.
I could say something. So I don't actually currently work with youth, but I used to be a graduate teaching assistant. And one of the things that I'd always remind my students is kind of, I don't have the power. I don't have the authority. I have the degree that you have, but we're all here collaboratively learning together. And, I'm a student like you, so let's all be students together. And I thought that was helpful.
I think that's very helpful. It shifts the power dynamic, and it lets people know that you're working within a different cultural frame where what they say and what they think, that you're learning from them too.
Yeah. And I would always remind them when something would come up that I hadn't thought about before. I'm like, that's great. I'd never thought of that in all the years that I've studied this or whatever. And I think that kind of mutual learning and, everybody is here benefiting from this conversation really help move a lot of our more difficult discussions along on some of those topics.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam.
No problem.
We've all been in those spaces where we haven't felt like our voice matters, or we've been dismissed, or we're just there to listen and not to be heard. And often inviting people into an inspiring vision is less about talking and more about deeply listening caring, valuing, and respecting, right? It's about showing up differently. And we all have those people in our lives that despite the, you know, the power dynamics or what their position is, when we're in their presence, we feel like what we say matters and that they learn from us too, right? We all know how that the air shifts when we're in the presence of those people. And so really, it's not just about how to write something. It's really about how to embody a liberatory way of being in community and in collaboration, and also using some tangible things, right? So I'm a movement chaplain. And when I'm really thinking about this community heal sessions that I do, I really think about who takes care of the caregivers, right? Because I'm in movements in which people are burned out, right? Which organizers, activists, people in the front lines, people who parent and caregive, right? Keep being burned out, who are traumatized, knowing that trauma is not a sustainable energy source for justice work, right? And so thinking about how do we care for each other and care about communal trauma and do healing in a communal way. And so my inspiring vision is really about being able to come together monthly, right? And to listen to each other, to care for each other, and to be able to continue moving our organizing and our movements further, because our movements are only as strong as the people inside of them. So that really is how the tangible ways that I talk about the work that I do, right? How do we stay in community knowing that loneliness is a public health crisis in the US? And now we're in a pandemic where we're asked to isolate in order to care for us, for each other. But how do we sustain that in a way that we don't, that our lives are nourished and generative? So just looking at time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna break out in threes or fours, groups of threes or fours, and you'll have a chance about 12, 13 minutes to practice, apply, and give feedback about your own inspiring vision. So the next slide, if you go to the next slide, the one that says breakout instructions. So you'll be in trios and you'll be able to, in a minute or less, share your vision, and your partners are going to be practicing deeply listening. So no interruptions, sometimes like, not even that, just be present, engaged, and let others feel like you're listening. People can tell when you're really there, right? And then one person says, here's what I heard. Here's what resonates with me. And so we'll have time for one person to do that. So one of the listening partners will be able to do that. And then you just keep rotating until everyone has the opportunity to share their vision and has had at least one partner tell them what they heard and what resonated with them. And so this is an opportunity for us to practice inviting people in, and also about deeply listening and really learning how to, or practicing how do we communicate in liberatory ways. So with that, I'm just gonna wait a moment until we're sent off into the magic of breakout room. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed being heard. I enjoyed being heard. I got to be in the room with Cassandra, and when she gave me what she heard and what resonated with her, it really made me feel like I was being listened to and that we were connected. And I think that those things and those practices are such powerful ways that we can do our work. And I know many of you are already doing this. So with that, just want to take a couple minutes. What did you maybe reflect back on what that experience was like to be heard, to be listened to deeply, and to also listen deeply yourself, along with sharing your vision, right? So if anyone wants to unmute, maybe has time for one or two people, what was it like to offer your inspiring vision and to also to be listened to deeply or to listen deeply? You can also put in the chat.
I can go ahead if you want.
Yeah.
So I was in a group with Bianca and Julie, which were awesome. But it was really cool. I think I work with engaging boys and men, so it's kind of, I want to say the quote unquote newer topic, but I think it's just a general topic that I think is, a little bit of a hot one. And Bianca and Julie just both had really good kind of pieces to kind of add to what I had to say. And even Julie, I think, was mentioning that she's going to throw in a little tidbit of what I mentioned into her own little presentation. So that validation almost is like, yeah, what you said is like absolutely right. And, this is definitely something that we need to do. And it makes it feel like the work that I'm doing is meaningful and that I'm now able to kind of really push forward.
Thank you, Billy. Awesome. And also, how might you use this work? It could be to Billy. How might you be able to use this in your work? Anyone else want to talk about that? Where does inspiring vision come up and listening deeply come up in your work?
So, go ahead.
Gabby and Elizabeth, and then Gabby.
So I work with teens, both boys and girls. I do groups, empowerment groups with them. And a lot of the times they don't feel like they're being heard, just in a general sense. So to be able to provide that deep listening to them and provide that space for them to talk freely, it's amazing. It's amazing to actually be able to be like that one person for them to listen to them because they just don't have it, unfortunately.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time, and you can use this in the virtual setting, right? Thank you. Gabby?
So I also work with programs. I work with teens. So we do a lot of planning, like school year planning, and we'll plan things and projects and curriculum months in advance. And I think a lot of times when we have these meetings to start planning, there tends to be one voice. Often it's my voice, and I own that about myself. That's like, this is what we should do. This is what we've done in the past. And I think even when we do open up spaces for other people to share their vision or share what they would like to see, we can, often in meetings, there's your own preconceived notions about what you want things to look like, how they should look like. So the act of actually just listening and not interrupting with your own priorities or with your own thoughts and your own opinions is not something that we do as often. And so I really want to do more of this. Like, let's give you the space to share what your vision is, and let me not say anything. Let me let you get through this. It's weird for me to realize that that's not something that I practice, and that I think a lot of the folks I work with practices often is just that idea of just letting someone have that space to 100% share what their vision is or what they're looking to do and what their plan is without interrupting them or correcting them in the moment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gabby. It's so true. And I think that this is something we practice with our families, with our friends, with our neighbors, with our community members, people we organize with. And also, if you're going into meetings where there's where you're trying to recruit folks, right? Or convince folks to come meet with you, or there's a power difference and you're lobbying and advocating. Actually, it's not just toward people who have less power than us or people we're working with, our peers, but it also works very strategically to be able to listen deeply and to tell folks, this is what I heard, this is what resonates with me, right? And to uplift the parts where it overlaps when you're trying to do advocacy work and get folks to see from your side. And so really sometimes it's less talking and more listening when you want to organize folks into your vision. Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so share one thing you're taking away as we're closing in our last minutes together. I feel like this one went fast too. I hope it did for you. But one thing you're taking away or appreciating in this moment. Anything you heard, being in the groups, whatever you've been practicing. What is one thing you're taking away or appreciating in this moment? Go ahead and put that in the chat about your work. Something small, choose something small. It could be something. Awesome. Getting input from others and sharing, how to engage others to collaborate, that we are not alone in this endeavor, the level of involvement compared to the level of ownership, being heard by others in the group, also reassurance that we're all doing a good job. Slow down, we don't have much time. Appreciative of the different components of the work where I can improve facilitation skills, meeting models, getting the chance to connect with folks who are passionate about the same things I am and who are open to sharing. How powerful listening is. I'm developing a program for men to have spaces to have discussions and really aiming to harness the power of conversation and listening and just understanding. That's so important. The importance of being heard and knowing your opinion is valued, that we are all going through similar experiences and struggles. We can work together and accomplish. How important it is to deeply listen to others. Learning about minimum necessary versus maximum appropriate. How to make more mindful efforts in engaging with the people I work with, both colleagues and participants alike. And I appreciate the way in which my coworkers agree to lead and follow each other. They're all supportive of leadership. It's so awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for dedicating yourself to the work that you all do. Often it's underpaid, overworked, you feel alone. I just want to let you know that you're not alone. I hope that you felt less alone in the work that you're doing. You all are doing a great job. And that your work is building this world that we all desperately need and believe in. So that's my personal thank you for showing up on a Monday afternoon to do this, that this is part of the work too. So with that, I hand it off to Kiera for closing and Jesse also.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't have much to add. I really appreciate all the things that you all shared in the chat and out loud. It just makes for such a rich conversation. I'm thinking about how much our values and our vision are surfaced when we speak our vision. So I'm thinking about it even when you're in hard moments with folks, it's hard to think of it then, but sometimes just leading with, you know, I know what keeps me coming back to the table. I know what I'm most proud of in this work. I know what I'm working towards, and sharing that and inviting others. Like, I keep coming to this work. It's hard, you know, maybe we're in disagreement or conflict, but you know, I believe in people's power, or I'm working towards a world free from trauma. You know, what keeps you coming back, and allowing some space for folks to fill that in. I think we find our humanity. So I'm learning a lot from you all and your tips, and I'm really appreciated to be in community with you all. Thank you so much. And I'll let Jesse give you all the good stuff that you need for the close.
Thanks, everyone. It's been really great seeing you Friday and today. It's been really great not having my dog sleeping and not squeaking toys when I talk. So we have a training evaluation survey that's linked here in the chat. We would really, really appreciate it. We know people are sick of doing surveys, as tired of as they are also looking at themselves on screens. But we really do look at these surveys and use them to guide what and how we do trainings. So please do take a moment. It's 3 questions to do that. We appreciate you being here. Please watch out for other trainings coming up. We'll be doing a storytelling training with Meghna Bhatt from CalCASA, which will be really great. And so we'll look forward to seeing you again. A reminder that if you are looking for more technical assistance and training, you can email info@calcasa.org, and also check out Prevent Connect if you haven't, because it has all things prevention oriented. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jessie. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Jessie, for all your help.
Yeah, I didn't know. Oh, Kiara's gone. Thank you so much. I think if you all want to do a quick debrief, I can send out an email to schedule.
Maybe I could just ask Kiara to jump back on if you have 5 minutes.
Sure, yeah. Let me stop the recording actually.